So tonight we've got two people speaking, and one is 𝗺cie who is our key speaker and a very powerful advocate for lived experience. And she will be followed by 𝗺cie𝗺𝗲𝗿𝗳𝗃, who's our acting chief executive in the health department. I'm fascinated because I've got no idea what they're going to be talking about. So I think it's sit back. Yeah, it's sit back and listen, and at the end of it. Okay. Thank you for coming tonight. I just, as a preamble, just say that this is going to be recorded. So, you know, if you have any questions and things to say, be aware of that. So I'm Dave Chapman. I'm the chair of the College of Psychiatrists Committee, branch committee in the Northern Territory. Some of you know me, some of you don't. And we've organised tonight as an advocacy night and around the lived experience domain. So to begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet on, the 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 people, pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and those that are emerging, and say thank you to them for the wisdom that they bring to us that we can weave into our work. And I'd like to acknowledge those with a lived experience of some mental condition of any sort, and their carers and their family. It's why we're here, if you like. The setting in my mind is that we live in a world where the mental health systems are top down. The focus is always on a handful of beds up here for the acutely unwell, and we sort of somehow do something underneath. And we can't continue to do that in the 21st century. What we need to do is to build a system from the ground up. So social determinants of health, lived experience. We need to have the GPs and clinics at that level. And then the next layer of a more sophisticated, comprehensive 24-hour community clinic, and then the access point to mental health acute services, and then the rest of it up the top, you know. So it's this way, not that way. So tonight we've got two people speaking, and one is 𝗺cie who is our key speaker and a very powerful advocate for lived experience. And she will be followed by 𝗺cie𝗺𝗃𝗃𝗃, who's our acting chief executive in the health department. I'm fascinated because I've got no idea what they're going to be talking about. So I think it's sit back. Yeah, it's sit back and listen, and at the end of it, we should have time for some questions and some discussion for your contributions as well. So 𝗺cie, please come and give us words of wisdom.
Thanks, David. I'm literally going to take my shoes off because it makes me feel more comfortable. I'm tired. I've written this hastily. I'll do my best. I'll probably bop around a little bit, but we'll see how we go. Thank you for having me here to speak. I have literally bounced off colleagues for weeks about what I could say here and how I could have the most impact. I have had so many ideas. When I wrote this first paragraph this morning, I decided to speak from the heart and weave through some of my lived experience as well as our collective community's experiences, some of my knowledge of recovery, and what I see as really a Northern Territory imperative, which is the establishment of a recognised and supported and resourced lived experience advocacy body. A body that represents the experiences of Territorians who are active service users and their family and kin, And I make the point of saying active service users, and we'll explain a bit more about that later. So as some of you may know, the network has established itself and grown rapidly over the last couple of years through the delivery of our peer programs. However, our vision was always to create a lived experience advocacy body in the NT, and the same kind of body and mechanisms that exist in every other state and territory. This presentation will absolutely meander, so bear with me. It's been belted out at different times of the day when I've had the opportunity to. I'm glad you mentioned the social determinants of health, because to me that is really critical to our movement and our role in improving the overall system as well as the health outcomes for Territorians. And I want to mention that running behind me is something to take your attention off me at times, to draw your attention to some of the research evaluations around our work, and to show the diversity of the community we represent and some of the outcomes that we've achieved in a pretty small amount of time. So before I go on, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting today. I pay my deep respects to the 𝗺liche people as the traditional owners of Garramilla, the Darwin region. I pay my respects to their elders past, present, emerging and future. And I extend my respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait and Torres Strait Islander people in attendance, and to the many First Nations people who I've had the privilege to learn from, particularly during my 15 years in the Territory. I want to acknowledge their profound relationship with country and their responsibility as custodians of the land. I feel privileged to live, work and raise my children on beautiful 𝗺liche country. And it's by virtue of raising my children here and from learning from Aboriginal people, particularly through the lived experience community, that I've come to understand that I have deep and abiding connections to this place, which I call home. So understanding and meeting my needs for connection to the natural environment in the top end, which I consider my forever home, as well as the cane fields where I grew up, and to the smaller places of safety and comfort that I've carved out in my home and office. This is knowledge I apply every day in my own knowledge, in my own experience of recovery, and to support my well-being. It's knowledge that our peer community learn from cultural practitioners and that we share through our peer recovery programs alongside other elements of the social and emotional well-being model. So we learned this information and we now share that information, knowing that all people can benefit from that holistic approach to health. The social and emotional wellbeing model is actually explored explicitly, and it's implicitly the benchmark for everything that we do, alongside the CHI model for recovery, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, and if not, you'll be hearing me and others in our community talk about it as a way of enabling community to develop self-efficacy and become the leaders in their own recovery. So in addition to acknowledging the traditional owners and emphasising the value we place on Aboriginal knowledge in the work that we do, it's also important for me personally to acknowledge that sovereignty of these lands has never been ceded, and that the impact of colonisation, dispossession, discrimination and violence toward Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is ongoing, with devastating impacts to their health and well-being. I hold a strong belief, and if you watch me launch grenades on LinkedIn, you may have read it, that if you work in health or any other role that serves community, then you have a personal responsibility to understand the social determinants of health and to advocate on this basis. We all have an obligation to ally with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to promote reconciliation and self-determination. If we're committed to addressing the overwhelming health inequities that exist in the Northern Territory and other parts of Australia. Even we, as a peer-run organisation, are committed to sharing our knowledge of the social determinants of health in a way that even our recovery program participants can understand and appreciate. And we do this for several reasons. We want our participants to develop self-compassion for their own experience, because most of us experience to some degree that pointy intersectionality by virtue of our attributes and our formative experiences, whether that's race, queerness, neurodivergence, or some other particularly visible attribute. And so for the second reason, so that we can cultivate compassion within our peer groups and between our participants. Our people come from incredibly diverse backgrounds and have a range of experiences. Our responsibility is to cultivate safety in those groups so that they have the ability to learn and learn evidence-based knowledge, improve their self-efficacy, and really get in the driver's seat of their recovery. So without support to understand models like the social determinants and other models like the relationship between trauma and addiction, our participants can be as judgmental and stigmatizing toward each other as the rest of the population can. So we make a real point of presenting a simplified explanation of the social determinants of health, and we use the model created by the World Health Organization. We don't use the 𝗺𝗲𝗰𝗵𝗶 model because we want to recognise the crushing impact of structural determinants of health, specifically the effectiveness of government policy, of bipartisanship and investment in health and effective health services. The other critically important element of that World Health Organization model for the social determinants is that it explains very clearly what drives the effectiveness of government, bipartisanship and the development of effective policy, and that is people power. It is literally how much community cares for each other and are prepared to sacrifice for each other. And this is where our network comes in and the advocacy function we are seeking to fulfill. So, as you may or may not have guessed, this is probably the third reason we slipped the social determinants of health into our peer programs. We are determined to raise a collective community of advocates as well, because we're not funded for our advocacy, but we want to raise awareness about the importance of collective community power and social justice. We know from the research by 𝗺𝗎𝗻𝗻 that empowerment is the strongest enabler at an individual level for a person's individual recovery. And we know from the disability rights movement that it is collective empowerment and advocacy that creates social change. We are determined to create social change, not just for our benefit, but for your benefit too. Our network is made up of individuals, of their family and kin who are interacting with the acute and community mental health services, with addiction treatment services, with the justice system, with disability services, and with a really large portion of work done by first responders. But who are we? We are not just your patients and their families. We are probably the plumber that comes to your house when your pipe bursts. We could be working at your corner store. We could be teaching your children. Like me, could be the engineer fixing up the wharf that was really dodgily built across the harbour about 15 years ago. We might also be the person who broke into your house or stole your car. We are your friends, we're your neighbours, we're your family members, we're your colleagues, and sometimes we're your antagonists. We represent the spectrum of community. I have no doubt we represent some of you in the room and some of your loved ones. So now I segue a very long way round to my recognition of people with lived experience. My usual approach is to recognise those in attendance with lived experience of mental ill health, trauma, addiction, and suicidality, and say that reforming the mental health and related systems can only occur by valuing, respecting, and drawing on the expert knowledge of individuals affected by these issues and their family and kin. But the fact is, without elevating the voices of people in the lived experience community, without empowering them, without creating opportunities for us to share our stories, to make our experiences visible, and to humanise instead of hiding and stigmatising the people in our community, there is no way to cultivate community will. And there will be no political imperative to drive those structural determinants of health. And every Territorian will suffer because we do not have a mechanism to muster people power that's required to create effective government policy, bipartisanship, and investment in effective and sufficient mental health services. So on this basis, I want to present to you an alternate recognition of people with lived experience. I would like to propose that each of us uses our influence to recognise and elevate individual and collective voices in the lived experience community, because this is how we will muster community will. This is how we will create political imperative, and this is how we can all improve the health and well-being of Territorians. Checking the time, David. I don't know where I'm at, but I got more to say. If I could, sorry, I'm just going to keep going. No. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit more just about us as a network and what we've achieved. There are some real obvious reasons for establishing a lived experience peak body. I don't want to spend too much time on them, as I think we bang on them a lot. They're in every other state and territory of Australia. They've been part of the reform history going back to the second mental health plan. There's a national consumer advisory body, a national care body. They're all things, right? They're just things that say to us we should be doing something, but we need to understand the evidence, and the evidence is really around, it's not trying to do more with what we've got, it's actually saying we don't have enough, and how do we get more? How do we create the imperative? And who's going to do that? And if we do that, that's going to benefit not just us, that benefits you. So our growth, I'll go back to our network, our growth over the last couple of years from Darwin and into Alice and Catherine has been by virtue of our peer programs. And I want to acknowledge the PHN and their extraordinary role enabling us to do that. And by virtue of the initiative we've taken to try and professionalise and build the actual peer workforce. So this is innovative work. It's been suck it up and jump in type work. And I can tell you better than anyone, it's been hard work, and we have dug deep. We have actually tapped into resilience, I think, that is unique to our community, and it comes from having to rebuild your lives after years, if not decades, of having life in a state of disarray by virtue of your health experience. But we believe in the value of the lived experience workforce so much because it has had such a critical role in our empowerment, not just in our shared learning of how to navigate the system and our sharing of evidence-based recovery. It is a community where we feel safe, where we're cultivating community values of acceptance and strength. And it's just a place to be, which is often something we struggle to find in the rest of the world. So we raise our own workforce, all of whom start as a participant in one of our programs. No one has been employed by our organisation who hasn't come through a participant pathway. We are actively growing and professionalising the Northern Territory lived experience workforce. And we started doing this by working with allies to draw on funds from the Department of Business. No health money involved whatsoever. And yet we are actually those people, because I know you understand models, who fit into the step care model. We are the top 3% who have severe mental illness and multi-agency needs. We are the 1% with psychosocial disability. Our staff and our students are on disability support pensions, have NDIS plans, have been to jail, and we are thriving because we have experienced and know the value of peer work, and we want to give that back to our community. And because we know the value of having a collective voice through advocacy. But as I said, the advocacy work is unfunded, and as such, we can't give it anywhere near the attention and time that we would like. And I can tell you that we are increasingly recognised and asked to contribute to national studies and advisory bodies and submissions, and we can't. And I receive 2 to 3 requests a week asking me to do something, share something on Facebook, but it's written in gobbledygook. How do I even find the half an hour to translate that and turn that into something that's accessible to our community, to even use our social media platform to quickly flick it out? So we rarely have time to even respond to requests like that. And what that means is that our collective experiences, the experiences of Territorians, and we're connected to probably more than 2,500 people now through our different just social media platforms. Our collective experiences, the most disadvantaged and vulnerable people in Australia in terms of mental health, suicidality and addiction, are not able to channel up into those national policy decisions. They're not able to even tweak where we should be pulling money from out of the coffers of the Commonwealth Government. Having attention drawn to what happens here, because if you can make something work here, you can make it work anywhere. One other thing I guess I wanted to talk about, which has come to our attention, is the difference between what we are seeking to represent and a concept that was proposed to us fairly recently. So when we talk about lived experience, I want to be really clear that our lived experiences are acute distress, complex trauma, they're help seeking, they're being turned away, they're involuntary treatment, their seclusion, restraint, their diagnosis, re-diagnosis, their addiction, their court-ordered treatment, incarceration, tribunals, homelessness. And they're very common experiences people bring into our program. Most of us have had recurrent experiences of suicidality. I had my first experience of suicidality at the age of 8, and it's something that is reoccurring through it just is, but I still get on with my life. I know how to manage that. However, our network and its objectives are very distinct from local suicide prevention networks. We are in the business of living our best lives and recovery, and that requires collaboration and support from very big systems that hundreds of millions of dollars are invested into. We have a role in approaches to suicide prevention, which require a whole of community approach, but we are very different to many of the local place-based suicide prevention networks, which are often started by bereaved families and community leaders. It was proposed to us that our experiences are equivalent and should be rolled into a collaborative. And I want to be really clear that I don't think that's appropriate. It's not done elsewhere, and it doesn't recognise the difference between the different recurrent and ongoing experience that we have. And also that a great proportion of people who do suicide actually don't ever even touch those systems that we're talking about and the reformation that we have the ability to contribute to. Look, I think I'll leave it there, David. I'm not sure what to say. Thank you for listening to me. It jumped around a little bit, but I hope you took something away.
Thank you, Arlene. I don't think it matters that you jump around. We got a message, that's all that matters. I'd like to invite Christine to come up and offer some insights and reply. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Noreen. That was very interesting. I have to say, I had not heard about the lived experience network, so it's been a good learning experience for me. I'm Christine Connors. I'm the Chief Health Officer and currently acting Chief Executive, and Minister Wi sends her apologies, so I'm presenting on her behalf. I'm a GP by trade and have worked in the Territory since the late 80s, so a long time, mostly working in remote communities as a GP and a public health doctor. And certainly, as I was saying to Nolene earlier, as a public health doctor, I'm very interested in the evidence that shows so clearly that including the values, the knowledge, the experience of people with a variety of health issues, whether it's a mental health issue or some particular disease, almost always, it not only improves the system, it actually improves outcomes. And, you know, it is frustrating that our systems are so well established that we continue to ignore the evidence. But hey, I'm a public health doctor. We spend less than 2% of health fund monies on prevention. So we're very good at ignoring evidence in the health system. So look, I would also like to acknowledge the Larrakia people whose lands we're meeting on. And as I said, I've had the pleasure of living and working on Larrakia land for many years, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I was very interested to see the engagement that your group has had with First Nations people, and obviously has really been bringing them into that whole peer support process. So within NT Health, as I'm sure most of you do know, there's been work being led by the Chief Psychiatrist for the revised mental health bill, and that is due for release very, very soon, possibly May, but maybe even late April, but definitely May, I think, to go out for community stakeholder consultation. And I'm sure that all of you will have some really pertinent input to that proposed bill. Nolene acknowledged the PHN, and certainly I think the Primary Health Network and NT Health have probably worked most collaboratively in the mental health space in terms of trying to identify where we're currently funding and where we've got gaps, and then trying not to, well, it's hard to duplicate, there's so many gaps, but trying to ensure that we can invest where we can actually get outcomes. And I think that's been a real benefit for the NT. You know, many of you have been here for quite some time, and enormous frustrations in terms of the sheer lack of funding that's available from either the Commonwealth or NT government to enable us to deliver the services that we know our community needs. I mean, the challenge with poor social determinants is it totally stuffs people up in many, many ways, leading to terrible challenges with their mental health, and that exaggerates challenges with their physical health, and then it just becomes almost impossible for people often to get out of that cycle. So last year, we did have the NT Suicide Prevention Strategic Framework Implementation Plan that was launched, and that is supported through community grants. And you know, I think we're making small but important gains in suicide prevention. I think we've still obviously got a long way to go, and I noted Nolene's comments around advocacy in that space. I've got notes here which I'm just sort of ripping off, so I'm trying to make sure I cover off the key points they've written for me. So there is a new, the first, in fact, mental health lived experience framework that has been developed. And I suspect that most of you had some input to that. There was around 140 stakeholders, and that will be released shortly, but I think that will be launched by the Minister, so I don't have a date for that. And it will definitely be promoting and advocating for inclusion of lived experience voices. And whilst I'm sure it will not go as far as Nolene would advocate for and promote, I think it's absolutely a step on the journey that you've been, trying to shine a light down the path for. It will particularly provide guidance for mental health workers, and in some ways, mental health services had sort of been at the forefront of recognising the importance of lived experience and consumer engagement. And then in other ways, they're not. It's quite strange. At a national level, hospitals and health services are under a national accreditation standard, and there's just been stronger and stronger and stronger focus on consumer engagement as possibly, well, there's two key areas that if you don't pass them, you're in major problems. One is your clinical governance, and the second is your consumer engagement. And initially, it was a little bit sort of softly, wishy-washy. It's getting more and more focused, and I'm sure it's been informed by advocacy groups such as Nolene's to really make it actually very pointed that you need to do this and you need to demonstrate that you're doing this. Health systems are big institutions. I've spent sort of almost 40 years making changes in health systems in the NT, and I've been very successful in the primary care space. I've had extraordinarily limited success in the hospital space, and whenever I touch the mental health space, I just go, oh my God, we're really, there's so much competing noise that goes on. It really is a challenge, and trying to bring that mental health space into a cohesive system that makes sense for the person using it. I think we've definitely got a long way to go. But what will be happening, not only with the release of the lived experience framework, there was a lot of discussion with the stakeholders during that process to fund a lived experience representative body. And so there will be co-commissioning with the Primary Health Network, initially developing a lived experience collaborative network. And that is not what Nolene will want, but it's a step along the way. And we have competing voices, and that's always a challenge, and you would know that more than me, is how do you balance your competing voices? And what people will tell you from Alice Springs or Central Australia is very different what they're telling you from Borroloola and West Katherine region. It will create a stronger voice. It won't be as coherent as a single peak body. And it's not that we're outsourcing, but in many ways, it's almost like it's obviously the best thing to do that the consumer groups, people with the lived experience, you need to come together and then further tell us as government, as Primary Health Network, as funders, how do we do that better? And so that is the next step. As I said, I know that will be disappointing for Nolene and some others, but I do think it actually takes us a little bit further along the journey. And you know, I think really the dedication that Nolene and the current lived experience network have been showing is extraordinary. I didn't have any understanding of the extent of the work that's been happening with training and developing and supporting peer support workers, and the fact that they're all coming through the training pathway in and of itself is amazing. And that is not something I think that many health services can claim, that they actually have peer support workers who literally come through that pathway. So I think that is extremely admirable and commendable, and I'd just like to thank you for coming tonight, and thank you, Nolene, and your group for your advocacy. That's a challenge for governments. Not meant to fund advocacy. It's like, oh, okay, do we just go and sell some raffle tickets on the side? Again, very frustrating. I'm not sure. Can PHN fund advocacy, Jill?
Depends what we say it is. Probably
Consumer engagement.
Yeah, probably a little less structured than capacity building. We can do
Capacity building.
Thanks, Nolene.
Yes, yes.
We can do that.
Excellent. Yeah, no, it's good how all sorts of constraints get put around. Anyway, thank you. I certainly look forward to the release of this lived experience framework, and I look forward to seeing what influence we can have in terms of how we change our health systems so it does better meet the needs of people who are using them. Thank you.
Any questions? Any input, Jill?
Oh,
I thought you were just going to say, here's a couple of million to...
yeah, that's right. Just shoved in my back pocket. No, it was just lovely to hear both speakers, and thank you, Nolene and Christine, because both came from the heart, because it's a wicked problem and there are no easy solutions. But you know, one of the observations I would make after many years of working in mental health and health is that the path forward is through the lived experience space. But I agree with you. You know, having worked in mental health systems, it's very hard to navigate that juxtaposition and trying to navigate. And you know, I've tried for probably not as long as 40 years to try and change it from the inside, and my gut feeling is that we're still not there. We're still not there. You know, if you look at recovery in its purest sense, we still don't have that nuance around that, and that we still have a specialist first approach. And you know, it's gonna, maybe the next generation, maybe our children's generation, I don't know. But it's a journey, and there has been change, but still a journey.
It's so frustrating.
Well, I guess that's what life's supposed to be, frustrating.
No, it's not.
Well, I suppose it is. If it's not frustrating, it means you're never searching for the answer. You give up and accept.
Continuous improvement.
Exactly. You accept the status quo and never continually try.
Absolutely. But it's frustrating because, as Nolene said, often people using the mental health system, you know, have had so much disadvantage.
Yes.
And often that disadvantage makes them really vulnerable.
Of course.
And so then, you know, they're not really strong.
No.
To stand up and say, well, that's not acceptable, or what are you doing, or I don't agree with that.
Yes.
So that's, you know, that is the real challenge. And look, I think, you know, we've come an enormously long way in terms of broader society recognition and understanding of mental illness and a whole range of conditions from minor to very severe. But I don't know whether the mental health system has changed to the same degree.
It's 100 years out of date. It's the same system that existed in the first quarter of the 20th century. That's 100 years ago.
May I offer something? So today I finished delivering the unit promoting self-advocacy to our second group of students. And we have a group that is combined individuals who've been patients at county or patients in other places, as well as this time around we have people who have been very strong care advocates as well. And so their active experience is happening right now in terms of tribunals and decisions and stuff like that. And so if you think about how can we, I was trained as an engineer, as a problem solver, and like cost improvements through small gains making, small changes making big gains. The system I was raised up in. So when you empower people to understand rights, to self-advocate, what you're doing through that small investment is tipping that whole system from a grassroots approach, changing on a small level, but over periods of time. A lot of people go back in and out of county, and a lot of families are supporting those people, and they're the most knowledgeable. We will find each other. We will tell each other about rights and how to. Did you know the CBP flyers are behind the nurses station? Did you know there's a consumer guide online? We just found the chief psychiatrist procedures for seclusion and restraint, which one of our parents took into a tribunal meeting recently. Like all that little sharing, all those little sharings are slowly tipping culture and power in the system. So you don't necessarily need to, I think sometimes it's just having these conversations. What are innovative ways that we can tip culture and make change that contributes to recovery? That paper by 𝗺cie, 91% of people said that having personal responsibility and autonomy in life, 91% of people reported that was an enabler for their recovery out of those 26 enablers. And what does our mental health system, because it's based on like 150-year-old medical paradigm, do? Completely disempowers people. So there's
mention the NDIS system.
I don't even get me started.
Molly, just to support your point from an advocacy point of view from the CBP, and I think a bit closer to your point, Christine, as well, is that the answers are often with the person. The consumer, the person who's on board, they have so many of the answers. It's actually being listened to, I think, is that's what we find is often one of the biggest barriers. And the tide is changing. We do have some great clinicians coming through, and the company is doing a great job, but the tide is changing, not fast enough. But we often find that persons who are attempting to advocate know their journey, know what is best. More often than not, it is what I have found, we have found at CBP, is that barrier of having a willingness, persons having a willingness to listen and supporting that. I think there's a real starting point that I don't think is recognised, and that's a person who doesn't understand their thoughts. Exactly. If they can't see any, if there is no, like in Alice Springs Hospital, they've got the CBP have put up 10 boards about patient rights in 10 languages. Person doesn't need to read, they can press a button and have their rights read to them. There's not even a visibility of rights in county ward. The family members that I know who have been interacting with that system for 20 years did not know about the CBP until they came to our program. Why is that information behind the nurse's counter? How does that even align with the quality and safeguards? And I know what you're talking about. I teach my students about those accreditation requirements. I have said to Jen, how are they getting accredited? Yeah. Because I understand that there was no, 𝗪𝗪𝗪 or whatever that board is, that 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 that had consumer lived, that was dissolved and not in functioning for a number of years, and that it's been years since a consumer consultant was, Tracy Miles, her name is still famous up here. Pip down in Alice Springs, those roles have not been filled for 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
There's one lived experience worker in the whole of the NT, and it's a 0.5 carer consultant in Alice Springs.
Yeah, right. Okay.
No peer workers. When I go to interstate conferences, I want to headbutt the Victorians for talking about not enough peer workers in there. I'm not lying. I will get up and, clearly.
Well.
See me enough.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
we can think about other health systems.
I'll take me off.
So much, let's say, right. Yes, yeah.
Anyway,
But, I mean, you know, NT, one of the things that NT Health has actually been doing is identifying, you know, there's been some really significant gaps in Commonwealth funding for a whole variety of reasons into the NT, which means that, you know, NT government sort of tried to compensate for that, which has left us nothing for innovation, nothing. And in a year with the new National Health Reform Agreement, we will be getting more monies, and we're trying to butt heads as much as possible to get it before then. So
we're
there
really
will be
good.
opportunities
Yes.
to actually say, right, well, if we now actually fund it at the level we should be, what are our innovations? What are our changes? What are our...
I think one thing I'd like you to recognise is that we are your strongest ally and enabler for taking on the Commonwealth. And screaming for more funding and for our rights to be met and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, we can be quite clever. We knew we couldn't get money for health for the development of our workforce. We know people, we pulled that money from business.
Yeah.
You know, we mostly get funding through the Commonwealth Department of Health or Department of Social Services. We've never been funded by NT Health, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So, I know we seem antagonistic, and don't get me wrong, I'm angry a lot of the time, but we can be harnessed as a very powerful and committed ally. No one is more committed than us because this is our life.
Well, and, you know, look, I'm sure that at personal levels, people can easily slip into antagonistic roles, but we're a very small jurisdiction. The rest of Australia doesn't really give a shit. The Commonwealth literally has no understanding. They keep coming up with national programs and going, and then, you know, it's almost boring when you have to keep saying we're a bit different. I feel like Alice Springs, we're a bit different.
So, but on the National Consumer and Carer Forum, it is the Territorian Consumer Representative, that's co-chair, and the Territorian Care Representative, that's co-chair at that national level. Like, so they are going in and meeting with the Minister for Health and Assistant Minister for Mental Health. And we have been through, you know, most of my travel interstate is on the back of delivering evaluation findings related to our peer programs, but we network as hard as we can.
Sure.
With the more powerful advocacy stakeholders there, the ones who do have relationships and influence at a Commonwealth level. So we're not you know,
feedback that you're getting at that level, do you think? I mean, do you think people are actually understanding? Are they actually
one of the things we did, we were horrified actually. They were setting up an advisory body around suicide prevention, and they had no one from the NT on it. And they wanted, because you know how they try and get representation in terms of target demographics. And it was, I think, Helen, who's the consumer co-chair, who said, you're setting that up and you don't even have anyone on the NT, the place with the highest suicide rate in the country. You don't even have a voice up there. And so what they came back with and said was, oh, maybe you can get someone from Defence because that would help us tick that box too. But they were quite prepared to go ahead with a national advisory body that had no one from the NT on it at all. But because we have been, you know, don't get me wrong, like we are always the ones in the room going, you know, that's great, being out in Conway, you get $8 million a year and have 40 staff. We're a very small population, we're very diverse, we're very spread out, but we're here. And please stop talking about, please let us talk, and please listen to us, and please take our message where you can take it, because we can't get to those places. And we have been persistently doing that, and Lauren did that through the PHN as well. And so over probably, I would say, since the network's inception in 2020, like, you know, the co-founders are Helen, Lauren, me, and a couple of others. We have been literally trying to squeeze and poke wherever we can.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is, we're an untapped resource. It's not just the fact that we're asking for resourcing. We are doing our own work to try and push at different levels to bring money down and support and our voice.
Oh, look, I mean, I think I have to agree. There is no doubt the Commonwealth will listen way more to consumers and consumer representatives and organisations than it will to other government departments. There's absolutely no doubt.
We can encourage it.
Whether it changes
Networking and
anything, well, that's another story, but they'll listen.
I think
And you're right.
we
I-
probably
you know,
could
I
wander
think we
down
do
there
need to look at
in
how
a
we
little while and
maximise,
then
because,
sit and
you
order.
know, we are shouting
Mm.
into the wind a lot of the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, so this is maximising mad people standing with the doctors who
Mhm.
literally sign off, you know, on the paper that can sometimes remove our human rights for our safety.
Yeah.
It's pretty full on. Like, I mean, it might not be so full on to you, but for our community, it's pretty.
Still in the area of
Yeah, no, I know. But the symbolism of us standing together to ask for recognition and improvement around that is very strong to us.
Mm.
It's I'll add a little bit to that. So a certain Noreen Armstrong sent me a message on LinkedIn today, I seem to recall, basically saying a lone voice that doesn't achieve much, but lots of voices do. So we have a very eclectic bunch here. What if everybody in the eclectic bunch stood, you know, neatly away and took a photo and sent it to, I don't know who you sent it to. So part of our problem is, how do we exert influence? You know, Christine can report back to the minister. I've seen her, met her once. With a bit of luck, I'll meet her again, or I can go through the same arguments. Jill, Anne's team said exactly the same thing to the minister I did. Good God, shock, horror, two different groups saying the same thing. You know, so maybe that's part of the process is to.
We all want a better health system.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's the commonality, Dave, is everyone does actually want the same outcome. We definitely want a better health system. We want something that's more fit for purpose for people using it. We want better outcomes for people who've got mental illness. So that's all common.
And their families.
And then we just have big fights about what's the best way to
I think
achieve
some of it's about what are we willing to give up together.
that.
Because I think if we listen to the narrative around this is 150 years old, this narrative, whatever it is, we've got to let go of some of that narrative. You know, we've let go of a lot of health stuff in other areas of health, but in mental health, we still hold on to these interesting ideas that were generated in the 1920s, 1910s. After the First World War, they did a lot of studies at the Royal Marsden and places like that. You know, there's a whole heap of stuff that went on, but we're still using that stuff, even though there's all this new stuff that's coming around recovery, self-advocacy, all of those things. And there's a reason around that, and that's about it's professional dynamic. And it's not just professional, because I don't think people are doing it for the wrong reasons. People are doing it for the right reasons, but we're not there yet. We're not willing to give up stuff to move to something different.
It's not rocket science though, is it? Like people are going in traumatized and they're coming out more traumatized. Like, and it's not rocket science. Why is it so hard to change the systems?
I'd love to send you a paper about the economic value of peer work, because I've done a study about in hospital beds. It's a return of 3 to 1 return on investment. And I look, I think there's, you know, you're talking about changing culture. I think you know, that insert for a peer work, they do a unit about continuous improvement and data collection methods and how to present that, because they recognise that they're change makers. They're instigators of reform. So,
So Dave, in the mental health space, do you often have people with lived experience who might come and talk about their reflections and their experience to clinicians?
Not in my 20 years of working in the Northern Territory. Mostly it's been having a coffee with Noeline or people that I know, or
One of the system changes I've been involved with over the last 10 years is it started as diabetes in pregnancy, but it's now really looking diabetes a lot across the life course, because we started seeing a lot more young people developing type 2 diabetes, which comes with its own huge significant mental health issues. And so we've been running an annual symposium through 𝗵𝗲𝗶𝘶𝗵, and the most powerful talks that we've ever had on a few different occasions has always been people with lived experience. And everybody comes out talking about it, and everybody actually makes some little change.
So some of you know, most of you probably don't. My 2 areas of interest are ADHD and women's mental health, and the intersection of them, because that's most of the patients I currently see privately are perimenopausal women with ADHD. It's a bit of a mind problem. And we'll add on all the comorbidities as well, of which there are many. One of the interesting things is I have tried the economic arguments, and government ignores them. Some of you will know ADHD costs the Australian economy $20 billion every year. Translate that into the Northern Territory, that's $200 million a year, which is, if I remember my sums rightly, about 3 times the total mental health budget in the Northern Territory. And you can do
that doesn't seem right.
Okay, but
anyway, I think the 3 times.
200 million is an awful lot of money. That's one single disorder, just one. So what else is there? Maybe one of the ideas that has come out is talking about education. So there is no, unless things have changed dramatically, there is no education for ADHD for budding psychiatrists. I don't know whether Tom, no, he didn't.
I wouldn't say none, but minimal.
Minimal, yeah, okay. So a $200 million economic cost, training virtually zero. Lived experience and the importance of that within patient treatment. I don't ever remember getting a single lesson. I've had plenty of lessons from other people, but not from the profession. So maybe our role, the college's role.
So social workers are starting to ask us to come and talk to their student again. It's something we're trying to fit in for free around.
It shouldn't be something that you do for free when it becomes a significant part of your job, your life.
How do we fund peer support workers at a minimum to come and start delivering training? Because certainly, these people with lived experience talking about diabetes, they were particularly talking about their interactions with clinicians in the system and how it made them feel and how it did or didn't help them to manage, because diabetes is a bit like a mental illness. 99% of the management is done by the person. So, you know.
I have many presentations I can pull out. And I have a 1 hour presentation for organisational capacity building to just entry-level understanding of peer work and what's required from an organisational side to embed that workforce. It's not all just here's the peer worker, drop them in, as well as local evidence base to demonstrate the value to recovery outcomes and that sort of thing. So look, and when I haven't been able to do that, I've sent students my presentation and another student go and share their lived experience testimonial.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other thing, I think there's also this perception, and it's the same around lived experience engagement for governance. It's not that hard, like we're not that scary, honestly. And a bit of capacity building around understanding your role in governance, how governance group operates, what's the role of the chair, you know, getting alignment between, the other members on there, you know, maybe setting up some values about how the group engages. Everyone has a terms of reference, understands purpose, a little bit of safety around that. It's actually, you know, it's not that hard to equip people to go into organisational and systemic governance positions. I mean, that's something in that training I did today. It's not part of the unit, but I'll throw it in there. But I want them to go out and be able to put their hand up for things, opportunities that come. And little, 𝗺𝗎 has it set up. They've got their, I think it's called the advisory group, but then they've got a little experience reference group that can feed into there. You can set up little mechanisms that feed into strong governance. So, and that's pretty standard. Like it's part of the headspace national model.
Yeah.
But it's not happening at 𝗀𝗲. Like it's not happening in the clinical system, but it's not complex.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing I think is it's also not complex, but it does require preparedness to change, to start to bring the lived experience workforce into those clinical settings. But I will say never peer work in isolation.
Tom?
Thank you very much, Noelene. I found that really insightful in terms of I was already aware of some role of lived experience, but highlighting the evidence and around that was really useful. Just wanted to make a comment, particularly with respect to the college, is that the college doesn't actually have a position statement on this, but it says it doesn't know, it's not quite sure where to go from here. Is the issue that, or the fact, not rather than issue, that of the however many thousand psychiatrists there are in Australia, that certainly hundreds themselves have lived experience. And if you include, and that would depend on what level of severity of mental illness, like huge numbers would have some experience, but relatively smaller would have experience of the more pointy end, but there would still be some.
Yeah.
And then if you include carer experience, which is what I have, is you would have an even higher number. But one of the complexities is that we're taught from medical school is to not, to share our own problems and not to disclose. And there are some really good reasons for that, because you don't want to burden your client with your own issues, and they're the person who's of interest, and often one's own experience wouldn't necessarily, but might not apply to them. And you have to, any clinician, even with quite severe mental illness, their experience is only one, but they have to deal with hundreds of thousands of different presentations, different life circumstances, different personal circumstances, identity, So it can be, yeah, I guess I just wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I guess, if I speak to less about the advocacy part and more about the peer work and the lived experience workforce, because they're very different.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, like, I worked as a peer worker for 4 or 5 years without any training. There was no training.
Yeah.
Before I did some remotely and then did a train assessor. But it is the value of our workforce is the shared experience. Training is required for the judicial use of the experience. It is not about me sharing my story. That it is about me honouring your story, tapping, because we come from a non-clinical, we work in non-clinical recovery methods. So very much around empowerment for that person, tapping into their own lived experience. Yes, sharing of evidence, what we know about evidence-based information to support recovery, but also, dignity of risk is really important in the work that we do. A well-trained peer worker really doesn't have to share much more about the lived experience, but it is their ability to create a connection with that person that happens really quick, that provides a rapid bridge of trust, that for a person whose experience is being told, you're broken, you're wrong, but this is what you do, this is why you need to do it, without having the opportunity. And I'm not just talking about medical practitioners, I'm talking about my family members and people in the community. That's a real difference in the work that we do and the ability to gain trust, which enables someone to perhaps want to understand what we know about recovery and what we have to share, to build their self-efficacy and some of their skills around starting to self-manage and understand the experience of trauma and have some self-awareness in their body, self-regulation, be prepared to re-engage with the system and that sort of thing. And we can do that by not having entirely common experiences and attributes with that person, although the closer they are aligned, the better. And certainly the experience of family and kin is very different to the experience of individuals, and I have both. And when I'm running the 2 different programs, because we have one for family and kin and one for individuals, I have to completely switch mindsets, and I can tell you the one that is harder is family and kin, because they are absolutely disempowered in that situation. Right? Whereas the one that is for individuals, they come to us in those programs when they're ready and they're open to it. Families come to us when they are desperate.
Okay. Thanks for sharing all that. Listen to all that. Christine, I'm just wondering from your perspective, you have an opportunity now with the folks and now the services and access. You look more into the content of the experience. Have you seen that reality in terms of enabling provision to set experience context governance? Well, to be frank, I have no idea what's going into the new mental health bill. I haven't had engagement with that at all, and I haven't had a briefing on that at all. The chief psychiatrist is currently on leave. He'll be back in a couple of weeks, and I think that's when it's going to go out for stakeholder engagement. But it is absolutely going out for stakeholder engagement because it's a requirement of any legislation. So it's definitely the opportunity to say, well, actually, you're completely missing this, and trying to legislate something around inclusion of lived experience. You've probably got a better idea of this. You just want to be careful how you frame it, but within any legislation, you always have your regulations, and I think that's where you've got an opportunity. So you definitely want to think about the principle. I think you definitely want the principle embedded, And then you could really flesh that out in some regulations, which would then give you an opportunity to update as things go along.
The experience of the sort of the children context has lived experience
Yeah,
through their reform process, which is to come up with advocacy for the governance reform
yeah,
in clinical setting. So I think, which is why I think here's where the opportunity is for us, but not sure
Yeah.
there's an appetite for it yet. Yeah.
well, Jill, what do you think? I mean, I think there would be.
I think you're right, this is just about how do we jurisdictionally change that? So I think the appetite is there, but it's starting community rather than in the instrument of, I think what you're referring to is the issue of the mental health acts. And I think that becomes problematic. But that relies upon the implementation and the interpretation of the acts through individuals. So the community based, but I think education is a good idea, you know, working with trainees in training, both, you know, psychiatry, any form of health environment, because it's not just mental health service providers that engage with mental health, people who identify as having a mental health issue. Often it's ED staff. So there's a lot of spaces around mental health that we can have an investment in. I think there is an opportunity, but it will start in that space before it gets into the innovation. It's the coalition of the willing. Skip to the one.
I'm just interrupt. I mean, this is probably most useful part of you. Some people I think are booked in the din, and some not. Notice that I booked in the din, I think to go downstairs and